The white lace of her wedding dress caught on a nail as Josephine Clarke threw herself through the back window of the First Presbyterian Church in Silver Creek, Montana Territory. And she did not care one bit that the sound of ripping fabric echoed through the summer air of 1876. Her heart hammered against her ribs as her feet hit the dusty ground behind the church, and she could hear the confused murmuring of 200 wedding guests inside growing louder by the second. Someone would notice her absence any moment now. Her father would be furious. Her groom would be humiliated. The whole town would talk about nothing else for years to come. But Josephine could not marry Herbert Dalton III, not even if it meant social ruin, not even if it meant losing everything she had ever known. She gathered up handfuls of white silk and tulle and ran. The mountains rose in the distance like ancient guardians, their peaks still touched with snow even in late June. She ran toward them without thinking, without planning, driven only by the desperate need to escape the suffocating life that had been planned for her since birth. Her satin slippers were wholly unsuited for running, but she did not slow down. Behind her, she heard the church doors burst open and the explosion of voices as her absence was discovered. "The bride is gone. Josephine has disappeared. Someone find her." The commotion grew fainter as she reached the edge of town and plunged into the pine forest that marked the beginning of the true wilderness. Branches caught at her veil, and she yanked it from her elaborately pinned hair, while letting it fall to the ground like a white flag of surrender. Her lungs burned and her legs ached, but fear and determination pushed her forward. She had no idea where she was going or what she would do when she got there. She only knew that she could not go back. Herbert Dalton III was everything a respectable young woman should want in a husband, at least according to her mother and every other society matron in Silver Creek. He came from money, old railroad money from back east. He had impeccable manners, a Harvard education, and political ambitions that would take him far. He was also cold as ice, controlling in every conversation they had ever had, and looked at her the way one might appraise a horse at auction. In the 6 months of their courtship, mandated by her father's business partnership with Herbert's father, she had learned to dread his touch and fear the future he described with such certainty. A future where she would be the perfect political wife, hosting dinners and smiling on command, producing heirs and never expressing an opinion that was not first approved by him. A future where every part of her would be slowly suffocated until nothing remained of the girl who loved to ride horses too fast and read books that ladies were not supposed to read and dream of a life filled with real passion and genuine connection. So she ran. The forest grew denser and the ground steeper as she climbed higher into the foothills. Her dress was a disaster now, torn and stained with dirt and pine sap. Her carefully curled hair fell loose around her shoulders. She had long since lost both slippers, and her stockinged feet were being cut to ribbons by rocks and roots. Still, she pushed forward, even as the sounds of pursuit faded away behind her. They would search for her, she knew. Her father would organize search parties. Herbert would be livid at the public embarrassment. But in this moment, scrambling up a mountainside in her ruined wedding dress, Josephine felt more alive than she had in months. The sun was beginning to sink toward the western peaks when exhaustion finally forced her to stop. She had no idea how far she had come or where she was. The forest surrounded her on all sides, thick with lodgepole pines and Douglas firs. A small creek burbled somewhere nearby. Her feet were bleeding, her hands scratched and raw. The reality of what she had done began to settle over her like a heavy blanket. She had run away from her wedding with no money, no supplies, no plan whatsoever. Night would fall in a few hours, and she was alone in the wilderness wearing nothing but a tattered wedding dress. Wild animals lived in these mountains: bears, mountain lions, wolves. The temperature would drop sharply after sunset. She had no way to make fire, no shelter, no food or water except what she could find in the creek. For the first time since she had thrown herself out that church window, Josephine felt the cold grip of real fear. She limped to the creek and knelt by its edge, cupping her hands to drink the icy water. It soothed her parched throat, but did nothing to calm her racing thoughts. What had she been thinking? She could not survive out here alone. She would have to go back, face the humiliation, marry Herbert after all. The thought made her stomach turn, but what choice did she have? The snap of a branch made her freeze. She turned slowly, her heart leaping into her throat, and found herself staring at the largest man she had ever seen in her life. He stood perhaps 20 feet away, watching her with an expression of wary surprise. He was easily over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the forest behind him. His arms were thick with muscle, visible beneath the rolled sleeves of a rough cotton shirt. His chest and torso spoke of a life lived in hard physical labor, every movement suggesting coiled strength. He wore buckskin trousers and heavy boots, and a knife hung from his belt alongside what looked like a hatchet. His hair was dark brown, wavy and long enough to touch his shoulders, with a beard covering the lower half of his face. His eyes, she noticed with a strange sense of detachment, were a striking shade of blue-green, like the creek water in sunlight. He looked like he had been carved from the mountain itself, all raw power and untamed wilderness. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice was deep and rough, like distant thunder. "You are a long way from anywhere." Josephine tried to stand and stumbled, her abused feet refusing to support her weight. Before she could fall, he moved with surprising speed for such a large man, catching her elbow to steady her. His hand was warm and calloused, and she could feel the strength in his grip, even though he was clearly being gentle. "Easy now," he said. "You are hurt." "I'm fine," Josephine said automatically, then winced as she tried to put weight on her feet again. The man raised one dark eyebrow, his gaze traveling from her tangled hair down to her filthy, torn wedding dress and finally to her bleeding feet. "You are a long way from fine, ma'am, and you are wearing a wedding dress in the middle of the mountains. Got a story there, I would wager." "That is none of your concern," Josephine said, trying to sound authoritative and failing miserably. She was exhausted, in pain, and terrified, and this man could overpower her without even trying if he had ill intentions. But something in his weathered face put her slightly at ease. He looked rough and dangerous, certainly, but there was a steadiness in his eyes, a calm competence that reminded her somehow of her grandfather, who had died when she was 12. A good man, her grandfather, one of the few she had known. "Name is Caleb Stone," the man said. "I have a cabin about a mile up the ridge. You need to get those feet tended to before infection sets in, and night falls fast up here. Not safe to be out after dark in that." He gestured at her dress. "I cannot go with you," Josephine said, even as another part of her brain screamed that she had no other choice. "I do not know you." "No, you do not," Caleb Stone agreed, "but you are hurt and alone and unprepared for a night in these mountains? I am offering help, nothing more. You can accept it or not, but decide quick. Sun will be down in 2 hours." Josephine looked back the way she had come. She could try to make her way back to Silver Creek, turn herself in, face the consequences, marry Herbert, live that suffocating life. Or she could trust this stranger. This mountain man who looked like he could tear a tree out of the ground with his bare hands, but spoke with unexpected courtesy. "Why would you help me?" she asked. "Why would I not?" he responded simply. "You are in trouble. I can help. That is reason enough." Something in those words, in the straightforward decency of them, made her decision. "My name is Josephine Clarke, and yes, I would appreciate your help very much." He nodded once, as if that settled the matter. "Can you walk, or do you need carrying?" "I can walk," Josephine said, pride making her stubborn. She made it perhaps 10 steps before her legs gave out entirely. Caleb caught her before she hit the ground, and without a word, he scooped her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. Josephine gasped in surprise, while instinctively clutching at his shoulders for balance. His arms were like iron bands, holding her securely against his chest. "Stubborn," he observed, but there was no judgment in his tone, almost a hint of approval. "I have been told that before," Josephine admitted. He carried her through the forest as easily as if she were a child, his boots sure on the uneven ground, never stumbling or slowing. Josephine found herself acutely aware of the warmth of his body, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the way his muscles flexed with each step. She had been held by men before. Proper society holds during proper society dances, but nothing like this. This was purely functional, and yet there was something intimate about it that made her face flush. "So," Caleb said after a few minutes of silence, "Joz, you ran from your wedding." "How did you know?" "The dress gave it away. And you came from the direction of Silver Creek. Heard there was a big wedding planned today. Whole town was talking about it when I went in for supplies last week. Some rich fellow from back east marrying some local girl. That was me, Josephine said quietly. I am the local girl. Guessing you had your reasons for running. I did. She did not elaborate, and he did not press her for details. They walked in silence for a while longer. The forest began to thin out, and the ground grew rockier. Josephine caught glimpses of stunning vistas between the trees, valleys stretching out below them, mountains rising in every direction. The air was thin and cold this high up, making each breath sharp in her lungs. Finally, they emerged into a clearing, and Josephine saw the cabin. It was solid and well built, constructed of thick logs chinked with mud and moss. A stone chimney rose from one end, and a covered porch ran along the front. Nearby stood a small barn or stable, and she could see a vegetable garden laid out in neat rows. A creek ran along the edge of the clearing, the same one she had found earlier, she realized, just further upstream. It was isolated and remote, but there was something appealing about it, something honest and real. Home, Caleb said simply. He carried her up onto the porch and shouldered open the door. The interior of the cabin was dim and cool, the air smelling of wood smoke and pine. It was a single large room, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall, a bed in one corner, a rough wooden table and chairs in the center, and shelves lined with supplies and equipment. Furs hung on the walls alongside tools and traps. Everything was neat and organized, surprisingly clean for a bachelor living alone in the wilderness. Caleb set her down carefully in one of the chairs and immediately set about building up the fire. Within minutes, flames were crackling cheerfully, pushing back the shadows and warming the room. He filled a basin with water from a barrel by the door and set it near the fire to warm, then rummaged through his shelves until he found a clean cloth and what looked like a tin of salve. "Let me see your feet," he said, kneeling down in front of her chair. Josephine hesitated, then lifted the hem of her dress. Her stockings were shredded and blood-stained, her feet a mess of cuts and scrapes. Caleb made a low sound in his throat that might have been sympathy or disapproval. She could not tell which. With surprising gentleness, he removed what remained of her stockings and began to clean her wounds with the warm water. His hands were huge and rough, the hands of a man who worked with them every day, but his touch was incredibly careful. He worked in silence, cleaning away the dirt and blood, examining each cut to make sure nothing was embedded in the wounds. Josephine watched him, fascinated by the concentration on his bearded face, the way he handled her injuries with such focused care. "You are lucky," he said finally. "Nothing too deep. They will hurt for a few days, but they will heal clean if we keep them wrapped and you stay off them." "I do not suppose you have any shoes I could borrow," Josephine said with a weak attempt at humor. The corner of his mouth twitched. "Might have some old moccasins that would work, once your feet heal up some. For now, you rest." He applied the salve, which stung but felt soothing at the same time, then wrapped her feet in strips of clean cloth. Hungry. Now that he mentioned it, Josephine realized she was starving. She'd been too nervous to eat anything that morning, and it had been hours since then. "Yes, actually. Very." Caleb nodded and moved to the fireplace, where he hung a pot over the flames and began adding ingredients. Venison, Josephine saw, along with potatoes, onions, and various herbs. The smell that soon filled the cabin was absolutely heavenly. "You live up here alone?" Josephine asked, watching him work. "I do. Been here about 3 years now." "Do you not get lonely?" He shrugged, stirring the pot. "I go into town every few weeks for supplies. That is enough people for me. I like the quiet up here, like the solitude. A man can think clearly in these mountains, without all the noise and complication of town life." "What did you do before you came here?" There was a long pause. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully neutral. "I was a soldier, army, fought in the war. After that ended, I drifted for a while, tried to figure out who I was outside of all that violence. Found my way here, found some peace, built this cabin, learned to trap and hunt and live off the land. It suits me." Josephine heard what he did not say, the weight of memory in those few words. The war was terrible," she said softly. "My brother died at Gettysburg. He was 19. "I am sorry," Caleb said, and meant it. "Too many good men died in that war. Too many boys who never got the chance to grow into men." They fell into a companionable silence. Caleb ladled stew into 2 bowls and brought them to the table, along with thick slices of bread that he said he had baked himself 2 days before. Josephine ate ravenously, barely remembering her manners. The food was simple but delicious, seasoned well and filling. She could not remember when anything had tasted so good. "Thank you," she said when she finally came up for air. "For everything. The help, the food, the shelter. You did not have to do any of this for a stranger." "Maybe not," Caleb agreed, "but it was the right thing to do." He studied her across the table, those blue-green eyes thoughtful. "You planning to tell me why you ran from your wedding? Or is that still none of my concern?" Josephine set down her spoon. "His name is Herbert Dalton III. His father and my father are business partners. The marriage was arranged to cement their alliance and expand their railroad interests. Herbert is educated, wealthy, well-connected, and absolutely certain that wives should be seen and not heard. In the 6 months I knew him, he never once asked my opinion on anything that mattered. He planned out our entire future without any input from me. And when I tried to express concerns, he patted my hand and told me not to worry about things I could not understand." She looked down at her hands, remembering. "2 weeks ago I overheard him talking to his father, and he said I was pretty enough but not very bright, and that he would train me to be the wife he needed, the same way you would train a dog." Those were his exact words. "Train me like a dog." Her voice shook with remembered anger. "I told my father I could not marry him. My father said I was being hysterical, that I was getting cold feet, that Herbert was a good match and I should be grateful. My mother said all marriages require compromise, and I would learn to adjust. No one listened. No one cared what I wanted. So when I was standing in that back room at the church this morning, about to walk down the aisle, I realized I had a choice. I could walk forward into a life where I was nothing but an ornament and a broodmare, or I could run. So I ran." Caleb listened to all of this without interruption, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "Sounds like you made the right choice." "Do you really think so?" Josephine asked, surprised by how much his opinion mattered. "I do. A marriage should be a partnership, not a prison. And no person should be trained like an animal. You deserve better than that." Tears pricked at Josephine's eyes. In all the months of arguing and pleading with her family, no one had said anything like that. No one had suggested that what she wanted mattered, that she deserved to be treated with respect. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have a plan now?" Caleb asked. "They will be looking for you." "I know, I do not have a plan. I just knew I had to get away." She laughed shakily. "I have no money, no belongings, nowhere to go. I did not think much past running." "You can stay here for now," Caleb said, "until you figure out what you want to do next. I have supplies enough for 2, and the cabin is plenty big. You can have the bed. I will sleep on the floor." "I cannot impose on you like that." "You are not imposing. I am offering." He cleared away the dishes and set them in a basin to wash later. "But you should know that they will probably come looking up here eventually. I am the only one who lives in these mountains close to Silver Creek. Someone will think to check." "I will leave before then," Josephine said. "I will not bring trouble to your door." "Did not say you had to leave, just saying we should be prepared." He moved to a trunk in the corner and pulled out some folded clothing. "These will be too big for you, but they are better than that dress. Spare shirt and some old trousers. You can sleep in them. And tomorrow we will figure out something better." Josephine took the clothes gratefully. They smelled clean, like pine and fresh air. "Where should I change?" "I will step outside, give you some privacy, call when you are done." He headed for the door, then paused. "Josephine, you did a brave thing today. Running like that took courage." Then he was gone, closing the door softly behind him. Josephine changed quickly, peeling off the ruined wedding dress and dropping it in a heap on the floor. The shirt hung on her like a tent, and she had to roll up the sleeves several times. The trousers were impossibly long and loose, but a piece of rope served as a belt. She looked ridiculous, she was certain, but she felt better than she had all day. The clothes were comfortable and practical, so different from the restrictive corsets and heavy skirts she normally wore. "I am decent," she called out. Caleb came back inside and gave her a quick once-over. "Looks better than the dress," Gurney said. "You should rest now. It has been a hard day." Josephine suddenly felt the weight of exhaustion crashing over her. Her feet throbbed, her whole body ached, and her mind was spinning with everything that had happened. She limped over to the bed, which was covered with thick furs and rough blankets. It looked incredibly inviting. "Thank you again," she said. "I know I keep saying it, but I mean it. You saved my life today." "Get some sleep," Caleb said gruffly. "We can talk more in the morning." Josephine lay down on the bed, which was surprisingly comfortable, and pulled the furs up over herself. And she watched as Caleb made up a bedroll near the fire, moving with quiet efficiency. Within minutes, she was asleep. She woke once in the night, disoriented and confused. Moonlight streamed through the cabin's single window, painting everything silver. It took her a moment to remember where she was and why. She could hear the soft sounds of Caleb's breathing from across the room, steady and deep. Outside, an owl hooted. The fire had burned down to embers, glowing faintly in the darkness. She had run from her wedding. She was in a mountain man's cabin, wearing his clothes under his protection. Her family was probably frantic. Herbert was probably furious. The whole town was probably scandalized. And yet, lying there in the darkness, Josephine felt something she had not felt in a long time. She felt safe. She felt, in a strange way, free. She pulled the furs closer and drifted back to sleep, a small smile on her lips. Morning came with pale sunlight filtering through the window and the smell of coffee brewing. Josephine opened her eyes to find Caleb already up, fully dressed, tending to the fire and preparing breakfast. He moved around the cabin with easy familiarity, every movement economical and purposeful. "Morning," he said when he noticed she was awake. "How are your feet?" Josephine sat up carefully and examined them. They were still sore and tender, but the throbbing had subsided somewhat. "Better, I think." "Good. Made coffee and biscuits. Nothing fancy, but it will fill you up." They ate breakfast together at the rough wooden table, and Josephine found herself studying Caleb in the morning light. He was weathered and scarred, with the look of a man who had lived a hard life, but there was kindness in his eyes and a gentleness in his manner that contradicted his rough exterior. She wondered how old he was. Probably in his early 30s, she guessed, though it was hard to tell with the beard. "What are you going to do?" Caleb asked, echoing his question from the night before. "I've been thinking about that," Josephine said. "I have an aunt in San Francisco, my mother's sister. She married against the family's wishes 20 years ago and moved west. We've exchanged letters over the years, and she has always said I would be welcome to visit. I could go there, start over. She runs a dress shop, and she might be able to help me find work." "San Francisco is a long way from here," Caleb observed. "How would you get there?" "The train, I suppose. From Virginia City. But I would need money for the ticket, and I have nothing." She felt the hopelessness of her situation settling over her again. How much would a ticket cost? "I do not know exactly. Perhaps $40 or $50? Caleb nodded thoughtfully. "I have some money saved. Furs and pelts fetch good prices when I take them into town. I could loan you what you need." Josephine stared at him. "You would do that? For me? We only just met." "You need help. I can provide it. When you get settled in San Francisco, you can pay me back. Or not. Either way, you will be safe and have a chance at a new life." "Why are you being so kind to me?" Josephine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Caleb looked at her steadily. "Because someone should be, and because I know what it is like to feel trapped. Oh, to feel like your life is not your own. After the war, I felt that way for a long time. Dead inside, just going through the motions. Coming here, building this life, it saved me. Maybe helping you is a way of passing that on." Josephine felt tears welling up again. She had been prepared for so many things when she ran yesterday. Prepared for danger, for hardship, for regret. But she had not been prepared for genuine kindness from a stranger, for selfless generosity with no expectations attached. "I will pay you back," she promised. "Every penny, somehow." "I believe you," Caleb said simply. They spent the rest of the morning discussing logistics. The search parties would be out looking for her, which meant traveling during the day would be risky. Caleb suggested waiting a few days for the initial furor to die down, then taking the back trails through the mountains to Virginia City, avoiding Silver Creek entirely. It would be a harder journey, but safer. "You would guide me?" Josephine asked. "Of course. You could not make it alone, not with your feet still healing. Besides, I need to go to Virginia City anyway. Been meaning to sell some furs, stock up on supplies. This gives me an excuse. Over the next 3 days, Josephine stayed in Caleb's cabin while her feet healed and they prepared for the journey. She learned quickly that Caleb was a man of few words but many skills. He could track a deer through the forest, tan a hide until it was soft as butter, fix anything that broke, and cook surprisingly good meals over an open fire. He taught her how to move quietly through the woods, how to read the weather in the clouds, knew Kitty how to find north by the moss on the trees. She also learned that he was patient and thoughtful, with a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard. When she accidentally knocked over a water bucket, flooding half the cabin floor, he simply looked at the puddle and said, "Well, the floor needed washing anyway." When she tried to help with dinner and nearly burned the biscuits, he rescued them at the last second and commented that he liked them crispy. He never made her feel foolish or helpless, even though she clearly had no idea how to survive in the wilderness. Instead, he taught her things, showed her how to do tasks, praised her when she got something right. It was so different from how Herbert had treated her, from how most men she knew treated women. Caleb acted like she was a capable person who simply lacked certain knowledge he was happy to share. On the second evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Josephine asked him about his life before the war. "Grew up on a farm in Missouri," Caleb said, his eyes distant with memory. "Big family, 4 brothers, 2 sisters. We worked hard, but we were happy. When the war started, my 3 older brothers and I all enlisted. Seemed like the right thing to do, fighting to keep the country together. My youngest brother was too young, stayed home to help my father with the farm." He paused, staring into the flames. "2 of my brothers died in the first year. Different battles, different times. I made it through the whole war, though I got shot twice and took some shrapnel at Petersburg. My oldest brother Samuel made it through too, but he was never the same after. Something inside him broke. He came home and could not settle, could not find peace. Ended up drinking himself to death within a year." "I'm so sorry," Josephine said softly. "That is war. It takes people even when it does not kill them." Caleb picked up a stick and poked at the fire. "After Samuel died, I could not stay there anymore. Everything reminded me of who we had been before, and that life was gone. So I left. Drifted west, worked odd jobs, tried to find something that felt right. Eventually, I ended up here. These mountains do not care about the war or the past. They just are. That kind of permanence, that indifference, it helped." "Do you ever see your family?" "I write to them sometimes. My mother writes back. But it has been 3 years since I left, and I have not been back. Maybe someday. But not yet." Josephine understood. Sometimes distance was the only way to heal. Sometimes you had to leave everything behind to find yourself again. "What about you?" Caleb asked. "What was your life like before all this?" Josephine thought about it. "Privileged, I suppose. My father owns the biggest general store in Silver Creek, along with several other businesses. We had a nice house, servants, all the comforts, but it was suffocating. So many rules about how a lady should behave, what a lady should want. I was supposed to be quiet and decorative and obedient. I was supposed to want nothing more than a good marriage and babies and a place in society. But you wanted more. I wanted to matter. I wanted to have thoughts and opinions and make my own choices. I wanted to feel like my life belonged to me." She laughed bitterly. "Sure, is that so much to ask?" "No," Caleb said firmly. "It is not." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire. Josephine found herself studying Caleb's profile, the strong line of his jaw visible above his beard, the way the firelight played across his features. He was not handsome in the conventional sense, not polished and refined like Herbert, but there was something compelling about him, something solid and real. He was like the mountains themselves, strong and enduring and honest. "Can I ask you something?" Josephine said suddenly. "Ask. Do you ever get lonely up here? Really lonely? You said you like the solitude, but does not part of you wish for companionship, for someone to share this life with?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "Sometimes," he admitted, "especially in winter, when the snows come, and I might go weeks without seeing another soul. There are times when the silence feels less like peace and more like isolation. But I have not met anyone who would want this life. Most women want things I cannot provide. Fancy dresses and social gatherings and a house in town. I am too rough, too damaged from the war. Better to be alone than to try to be something I am not. I do not think you are too rough, Josephine said quietly. I think you are kind and capable and good, and I think the right woman would be lucky to share this life with you. Caleb turned to look at her, surprise evident in his eyes. For a moment their gazes held, and Josephine felt something shift in the air between them, something electric and new. Her heart started beating faster. His expression softened in a way she had not seen before. Then he looked away, breaking the moment. You should rest. We leave tomorrow if the weather holds. Josephine nodded, feeling strangely disappointed. She got up and moved to the bed, but sleep was a long time coming. She lay in the darkness, listening to Caleb's breathing, thinking about the look in his eyes and wondering what it meant. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Perfect traveling weather. Caleb packed supplies into 2 large sacks while Josephine got ready, braiding her hair and putting on the moccasins he had found for her. They fit reasonably well, much better than trying to walk in bare feet or ruined slippers. He had also found her a spare shirt and a leather vest, along with a hat to keep the sun off her face. Ready? Caleb asked, shouldering the heavier pack. Ready, Josephine confirmed, though her stomach fluttered with nerves. They set out into the forest, leaving the cabin behind. Caleb led the way, setting a steady but manageable pace, always aware of Josephine's limitations. He had mapped out a route that would take them through the higher elevations, well away from the main trails and any search parties. It would take 3 days, he estimated, to reach Virginia City. The journey was harder than Josephine had anticipated. The terrain was rough and steep, requiring constant climbing and scrambling over rocks. Her feet, though healing, still hurt. Her legs burned with exhaustion, but she refused to complain or ask to slow down. She had gotten herself into this situation, and she would see it through. Caleb was endlessly patient with her. When she struggled over a particularly difficult section, he would offer his hand to help her up. When she needed to rest, he would find a good spot and wait without making her feel rushed. When she stumbled and nearly fell, he caught her with those strong arms and steadied her without comment. They stopped for lunch beside a rushing stream, eating jerky and hard biscuits from Caleb's pack. The water was ice-cold and crystal clear, fresh from the snowmelt higher up the mountains. Josephine splashed some on her face, gasping at the cold but feeling refreshed. "How are you holding up?" Caleb asked. "I am managing," Josephine said. "It is beautiful up here. I have never been this far into the mountains before." "It is something," Caleb agreed, looking around at the towering peaks and endless forest. "Always makes me feel small in a good way. It reminds me there's something bigger than my own troubles." They continued on through the afternoon. At one point, Caleb stopped suddenly and held up his hand for silence. Josephine froze, heart pounding. Had they been discovered? Were there search parties nearby? But Caleb pointed off to their left, and Josephine followed his gaze. Through the trees, she could see movement. A massive bull elk emerged into a clearing, his antlers enormous, his coat gleaming in the dappled sunlight. He was magnificent, powerful, and wild. They watched in silent awe as he paused to graze, completely unaware of their presence. Then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, he melted back into the forest. "Did you see that?" Josephine whispered, hardly daring to breathe. "That is why I live here," Caleb said simply. "The moments like that." As the sun began to sink toward the western peaks, Caleb found them a sheltered spot to camp for the night. There was an overhang of rock that would protect them from wind and weather, and a flat area perfect for laying out bedrolls. He built a small fire, carefully positioned so the smoke would dissipate through the trees rather than rising in a telltale column, and prepared dinner. They ate in companionable silence, and then Caleb insisted Josephine take the spot closest to the fire in the rock wall, the warmest and most protected position. He would sleep between her and the open forest, he said, just in case. "In case of what?" Josephine asked. "In case of anything," Caleb said. "Bears, wolves, people. I'm a light sleeper. I will hear if anything comes close." Lying in her bedroll, but wrapped in a borrowed blanket, Josephine felt that strange sense of safety again. She was sleeping on the ground in the middle of the wilderness, running from her old life with no guarantee of what waited in her new one. But Caleb was nearby, solid and steady and watchful, and somehow that made everything feel manageable. "Caleb," she said into the darkness. "Yes? Thank you for all of this. I know I have said it before, but I truly mean it. You have been kinder to me than anyone I have ever known." There was a long silence. Then, "You are welcome, Josephine. Now get some sleep." The second day of travel was similar to the first, though Josephine found her strength and endurance growing. Her body was adjusting to the physical demands, and her feet had toughened up. She was able to keep pace better, stumbling less often. Caleb noticed and gave her an approving nod. "You're getting stronger," he said during one of their rest stops. "You have good instincts for the wilderness. Some people never adapt, but you are learning fast." The compliment warmed her more than it probably should have. They saw more wildlife that day. A fox darted across their path, red as flame. A golden eagle soared overhead, riding the thermals with effortless grace. Once, in the distance, Caleb pointed out what he said was a grizzly bear, though it was far enough away to pose no threat. Josephine had never felt so connected to the natural world, so aware of being just one small part of a much larger ecosystem. That night, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Josephine asked Caleb about his plans for the future. "Do you intend to live in the mountains forever?" she asked. And Caleb shrugged. "Cannot say for certain. I like it here. But nothing is permanent, I suppose." "Why do you ask?" "I'm just curious about you. You have been so focused on helping me, but I realize I know very little about what you want, what you dream about." He looked uncomfortable with the question, like no one had asked him such a thing in a long time. "I do not dream much," he said finally. "I live day to day, make sure I have enough food and firewood, hunt and trap, maintain the cabin. That is enough." "But if you could have anything," Josephine pressed, "if there were no obstacles, no limitations, what would you want?" Caleb stared into the fire for a long moment. "I suppose," he said slowly, "I would want what I had before the war, a family, a home full of life and laughter, someone to share the burdens and the joys with, and children, maybe someday, a sense of belonging to something bigger than myself." He shook his head. "But that's not likely to happen, living the way I do." "It could happen," Josephine said softly, "if you wanted it badly enough, if you found the right person." "And what about you?" Caleb deflected. "What do you want now that you are free of Herbert and your old life?" Josephine considered the question seriously. "I want to support myself, to know that I can survive on my own strength and skill. I want to make my own decisions and live with the consequences. I want to matter, not just as someone's daughter or wife, but as myself." She paused. "And I want to feel something real. Everything in my old life felt artificial, like playing a part in a play. I want authenticity. I want passion. I want to know what it feels like to truly love someone and be loved in return, not as a business arrangement, but as a real, genuine connection." "That's a good list," Caleb said quietly. "I hope you find all of it." Their eyes met across the fire, and once again Josephine felt that electric current running between them. She wondered if he felt it too, this pull, this growing attraction. She wondered if he lay awake at night thinking about her the way she found herself thinking about him. But he said nothing more, and eventually they both settled into their bedrolls for the night. The third day brought them down out of the high country and into the foothills above Virginia City. They could see the town spread out below them, a sprawling collection of buildings and mining operations carved into the mountainside. Virginia City was a boom town, grown fat and prosperous on silver strikes, and it showed. Even from a distance, Josephine could see the activity, the crowds of people moving through the streets. "We will go in after dark," Caleb said. "Less chance of you being recognized. I know a boarding house where the owner does not ask too many questions. You can stay there while I arrange for your train ticket and wire your aunt in San Francisco." "You have thought of everything," Josephine said. "Trying to," Caleb replied. They waited in the trees until full darkness fell, then made their way down into the town. Virginia City was alive with noise and light, even at night, music and laughter spilling from saloons, miners stumbling between establishments, merchants calling out last-minute deals. But it was overwhelming after days in the quiet mountains, and Josephine found herself staying close to Caleb, grateful for his solid presence beside her. The boarding house was on a quieter side street, a respectable-looking establishment run by a formidable woman named Mrs. Whitmore. Caleb clearly knew her, and after a brief conversation and the exchange of some money, she agreed to provide Josephine with a room and meals, no questions asked. "You will be safe here," Caleb told Josephine as Mrs. Whitmore showed her to a small but clean room on the second floor. "I will come back tomorrow with your ticket and news from your aunt. Rest tonight. You have earned it." "Where will you stay?" Josephine asked. "There is a hotel down the street. I will be fine." He turned to leave. And Josephine felt a sudden panic at the thought of him walking away. They had been together constantly for days now, and the idea of being separated felt wrong somehow. "Caleb, wait," she said. He paused, looking back at her. Josephine crossed the room quickly, and before she could second-guess herself, wrapped her arms around him in a hug. He stiffened in surprise, then slowly, carefully, his arms came up to return the embrace. He was warm and solid, and being held by him felt like the safest place in the world. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. "For everything." She felt rather than heard his reply, a rumble in his chest. "You're welcome, Josephine." When she pulled back, his hands lingered on her shoulders for just a moment, and his eyes held an expression she could not quite read. Then he stepped away, nodded once, and left the room. Josephine sat on the bed, her heart racing, her skin still tingling where he had touched her. Something was happening between them, she was sure of it now, something real and powerful and absolutely terrifying. Because in a day or two she would be on a train to San Francisco, starting her new life, and Caleb would return to his mountain cabin, alone. The thought of never seeing him again made her chest ache. The next morning, Josephine woke to find a package waiting outside her door. Inside was a dress, simple but well made, along with a proper chemise, stockings, and even a pair of ladies' boots. There was a note in Caleb's handwriting. "Thought you might want something more suitable for travel. See." She changed into the dress, which fit reasonably well, and felt strange to be wearing women's clothing again after days in borrowed trousers and shirts. She looked at herself in the small mirror on the wall and barely recognized the woman staring back. Her face was sun-browned, her hair tangled despite her attempts to tame it, her eyes bright and alive in a way they had not been for months. She looked like someone who had been living, really living, instead of just existing. Caleb arrived mid-morning, carrying a leather satchel and wearing a grave expression. Josephine invited him into her room, propriety be damned, because she needed to know what was wrong. "I have your ticket," he said, handing her a paper. "Train leaves the day after tomorrow, early morning. Should get you to San Francisco in about a week, accounting for stops and transfers." "And my aunt?" Josephine asked. "Yet, I sent a wire to the address you gave me. Have not received a response yet, but that is not surprising. It takes time. I am sure she will be waiting for you when you arrive." "What is wrong then?" Josephine asked, because she could tell something was bothering him. "What are you not telling me?" Caleb sighed and sat down heavily in the room's single chair. "Your father put up a $500 reward for information leading to your safe return. Posters are all over town. Your description, details about the wedding. He is saying you were distraught, not in your right mind. Herbert is claiming you were confused and frightened, that you need protection and medical care." Anger flared hot in Josephine's chest. "Of course they are. They cannot let people think I left of my own free will. That would require admitting I had a will to exercise. The problem is, $500 is a lot of money. People will be looking for you. If anyone recognizes you before you get on that train, they will turn you in without hesitation. Then I will stay hidden until it is time to leave," Josephine said. "I have come this far. I'm not giving up now." "I know you are not," Caleb said, and there was something like pride in his voice. "I just want you to be careful. Stay in this room as much as possible. Mrs. Whitmore will bring your meals. Do not go out unless absolutely necessary." "Will you stay in Virginia City until I leave?" Josephine asked, hating how desperate she sounded. I will, Caleb promised. I am not leaving you to face this alone. He visited her 3 times a day for the next day and a half, and bringing news and supplies and his steady, calming presence. They talked for hours, about everything and nothing. He told her stories about his trapping expeditions, about close calls with wild animals and harsh weather. She told him about books she had read, about the world she had only experienced through pages and imagination. The more time she spent with him, the more Josephine realized what was happening. She was falling in love with Caleb Stone, not the giddy, superficial infatuation she had seen in other young women, but something deeper and more real. She loved his kindness and his strength, his quiet competence and his gentle humor. She loved the way he treated her like an equal, the way he listened when she spoke, the way he made her feel safe and valued and seen. And she was about to leave him forever. The night before her train was to depart, Caleb came to her room one last time. He brought dinner from a local restaurant, much better fare than the boarding house provided, and they ate together by lamplight. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" he asked. "Terrified," Josephine admitted. "Not of the journey, but of the unknown. What if my aunt does not want me after all? What if I cannot find work? What if I am making a terrible mistake?" "You are not making a mistake," Caleb said firmly. "You are choosing your own path. That is never wrong. And your aunt will be glad to have you. How could she not be?" "I will miss you," Josephine said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "These past few days with you, they have been the best days of my life. I know that probably sounds silly." "It does not sound silly," Caleb said quietly. He set down his fork and looked at her intently. "Josephine, I need to tell you something." Her heart started pounding. "What?" He seemed to be struggling with how to put his thoughts into words. "When I found you in the forest, wearing that wedding dress, you looked like a wild thing, frightened and fierce and beautiful. I thought I was just helping a stranger in need. But then I started getting to know you, your courage, your intelligence, your humor, the way you did not complain even though you were hurt and exhausted, the way you adapted to the wilderness, learned from it instead of fighting it." He stood up and crossed to where she sat on the edge of the bed. He knelt down so they were at eye level and took her hands in his. "I am not good with words," he said. "I am not smooth or educated like the men you are used to. But I need you to know that these days with you have meant something to me. More than I expected, more than I thought possible. I think I am falling in love with you, Josephine Clarke, and that terrifies me almost as much as it seems to terrify you." Josephine's breath caught in her throat. "You love me?" "I do. I know it is too soon, and I know you are about to start a new life without me in it, and I have no right to complicate things. But I could not let you leave without telling you. I could not let you go without you knowing that these days with you have changed something in me. You have reminded me what it feels like to want something, to hope for something beyond just surviving." Tears were streaming down Josephine's face now. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I started falling in love with you that first day, when you carried me through the forest and did not make me feel weak for needing help. And every moment since then has just made me more certain. You are everything Herbert was not. You are good and kind and real, and I do not want to leave you." "Then do not," Caleb said, his voice rough with emotion. "Stay with me. Come back to the cabin. We can build a life together in those mountains. It will not be easy. It will not be fancy or comfortable like what you are used to, but it will be real, and it will be ours." "Are you asking me to marry you?" Josephine asked, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "I am," Caleb said. "I know I should give you time, should let you go to San Francisco and figure out what you want. But I also know that if I let you get on that train tomorrow, I will regret it for the rest of my life. So yes, I am asking, marry me, Josephine. Be my wife. Let me spend every day for the rest of my life showing you what real love looks like." Josephine looked into his eyes, those blue-green eyes that had watched over her with such care, and she knew her answer with absolute certainty. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Caleb's face split into a grin, the first truly unguarded smile she had seen from him. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and Josephine felt like she was flying and falling at the same time. His lips were warm and firm, his beard surprisingly soft against her skin. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the passion and hope and joy she'd been holding inside. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "We will need to find a preacher," he said. "Do this proper." "Tomorrow morning," Josephine agreed, "before the train leaves, and then we go home, to our cabin in the mountains." They spent the rest of the evening planning. Caleb would use the money he had set aside for her train ticket to buy supplies instead, things they would need for the cabin now that there would be two of them. Josephine would send a letter to her aunt explaining the situation and thanking her for the offer of refuge. They would marry quickly and quietly, then slip out of Virginia City before anyone could recognize her and claim the reward. That night, Caleb reluctantly returned to his hotel room, wanting to do things right, and to preserve Josephine's reputation as much as possible given the circumstances. But they both knew that the next time they were separated, it would be as husband and wife, with the promise of reuniting at the end of each day. Morning came bright and clear, perfect weather for a wedding. Caleb arrived early, dressed in his cleanest clothes, his hair combed and his beard neatly trimmed. Josephine wore the dress he had bought her, and Mrs. Whitmore produced a small bouquet of wildflowers from somewhere, pressing them into Josephine's hands with a knowing smile. They found a preacher at a small church on the edge of town, an older man who asked few questions and seemed charmed by their obvious affection for each other. He agreed to marry them for a small fee, and within an hour of arriving at the church, a Josephine Clarke became Josephine Stone. The ceremony was simple and brief, no fancy decorations or elaborate vows, just two people promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their lives, witnessed by the preacher and Mrs. Whitmore, whom they had invited along to serve as their witness. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Caleb kissed Josephine with a tenderness that made her heart ache in the best possible way. This was what she had been searching for without even knowing it. This was the real thing, the authentic connection she had craved. This was love. They left Virginia City within the hour, loaded down with supplies, heading back up into the mountains that had become home. As they climbed higher, leaving civilization behind, Josephine felt a profound sense of rightness. She had run from her wedding, and in doing so, she had run straight into the arms of the man she was meant to be with all along. The journey back to the cabin took 3 days, just as the journey to Virginia City had. But it felt completely different now. They were not strangers anymore, not even friends. They were husband and wife, partners beginning a new adventure together. They walked side by side when the trail allowed it, and Caleb held her hand whenever he could. They talked about their future as they traveled, about how they would expand the cabin, adding a second room, about the garden they would plant together come spring, about children, maybe, if they were so blessed, about the life they would build together in those mountains, away from the expectations and restrictions of polite society. "Do you think you will miss it?" Caleb asked on the second day. "Your old life, the comforts you had?" "I miss my mother sometimes," Josephine admitted, not the woman she became, so concerned with appearances and status, but the woman I remember from my childhood. She used to be warmer, more loving. I think my father's ambitions changed her. And I miss my brother, though he has been gone for so long now that the grief is more of an old ache than a sharp pain. She looked around at the forest surrounding them, at the mountains rising in the distance. But miss the rest of it? The corsets and the calling cards and the endless social obligations, the way everyone judged everyone else constantly? No, I do not miss that at all. I would choose this life with you 1,000 times over. Caleb pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "I will do everything in my power to make sure you never regret that choice." "I know you will," Josephine said, "just as I will do everything in my power to be a good wife to you. Though I warn you, I have no idea how to do half the things required for mountain living." "I will teach you," Caleb promised. "We will figure it out together." When they finally arrived back at the cabin, Josephine felt a surge of joy. She had only been there for 3 days before, but it felt like coming home in a way that her father's house in Silver Creek never had. This was her home now, hers and Caleb's, and she was going to make it the warmest, happiest place she could. Over the following weeks, they settled into married life. Caleb taught Josephine how to preserve food for the winter, how to recognize edible plants in the forest, and how to set snares for rabbits and squirrels. He showed her how to split wood properly, how to maintain the fire, how to mend clothes with neat, strong stitches. Josephine proved to be an eager and capable student. She had spent her whole life being told what she could not do, what was not appropriate for a lady. Now, freed from those constraints, she discovered she was actually quite competent when given the chance. She learned to shoot the rifle accurately, to skin and clean the game Caleb brought back from hunting, to bake bread in the cabin's small oven. She also brought her own strengths to their partnership. She had been well educated, and she put that education to use, helping Caleb with the accounts he kept of his fur sales and supply purchases. She organized the cabin, creating systems for storage and inventory that made their daily lives easier. And she read to him in the evenings, books she had him buy on his next trip to town, her voice filling the cabin with stories and poems and ideas. Their physical relationship blossomed as well, tentatively at first, and then with growing confidence and passion. Caleb was gentle and patient, always attentive to her needs and comfort. Josephine had been raised to believe that intimacy was merely a duty, something to be endured for the purpose of producing children. But with Caleb, she discovered it could be a source of profound joy and connection, a way of expressing love that went beyond words. She had never felt more alive, more herself, than she did in those long summer days and cool mountain nights. News from the outside world reached them only rarely. A trapper passing through mentioned that Josephine's disappearance was still being discussed in Silver Creek, though the reward had been withdrawn after a month when no trace of her was found. Her family was apparently in mourning, believing she had perished in the wilderness. Herbert Dalton III had returned east, his political ambitions temporarily derailed by the scandal. Josephine felt a pang of guilt about her family's grief, but Caleb pointed out that contacting them would only put them both at risk. Her father might try to force her to come home or to have the marriage annulled. Better to let them believe she was gone. "Maybe someday," Josephine said, "when enough time has passed, I could write to my mother, let her know I am alive and well. But not yet." Autumn came to the mountains in a blaze of gold and red. Josephine and Caleb worked together to prepare for winter, cutting and stacking firewood, hunting and preserving meat, gathering and storing vegetables from the garden. It was hard work, exhausting and constant, but there was deep satisfaction in it. They were building something together, creating a life with their own hands. On a crisp October evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Josephine realized something that made her heart skip. "Caleb," she said slowly, "I think I might be pregnant." He looked up sharply from the trap he was repairing. "You think?" "My monthly time has not come. I'm more tired than usual, and certain smells have been making me queasy." She put a hand on her still flat belly. "I cannot be certain yet, but I think we might be having a baby." Caleb set down the trap and crossed to her, kneeling beside her chair. He placed his large, calloused hand over hers on her stomach, his expression full of wonder. "A baby," he said softly. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Josephine asked, suddenly nervous. "Happy?" Caleb looked up at her, and there were tears in his eyes. "Josephine, I am more than happy. I am blessed beyond measure. A wife I love and now a child on the way. I never thought I would have this. I never thought I deserved it." "You deserve every bit of it," Josephine said fiercely. "You are the best man I have ever known, Caleb Stone. Our child will be lucky to have you as a father." They held each other for a long time, the fire crackling, the wind sighing through the pines outside, the future spreading before them full of promise and possibility. Winter came hard and cold to the mountains. Betty snow piled up around the cabin, sometimes so deep that Caleb had to dig them out just to get to the wood pile. The temperature dropped well below freezing, and the wind howled like a living thing. But inside the cabin, it was warm and cozy. They had plenty of firewood, plenty of food, and most importantly, they had each other. Josephine's pregnancy progressed, her belly growing round and full. Caleb was endlessly solicitous, constantly checking to make sure she was comfortable, taking on more of the physical work even though she protested. He built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it smooth and carving little designs into the sides. He made soft blankets from rabbit fur. He even hiked down to a trading post, braving the winter weather, to buy cloth for baby clothes and supplies that Josephine might need for the birth. "You are going to be such a good father," Josephine told him one evening as she watched him test the cradle's rockers, making sure they moved smoothly. "I am going to try," Caleb said. "That is all any father can do. Try to be worthy of the trust placed in him." As winter slowly gave way to early spring and Josephine's time drew near, they discussed what would happen when the baby came. Ideally, they would have had a midwife or doctor present, but the nearest town was days away, and Josephine would never survive the journey this late in her pregnancy over snow-covered mountain trails. "I will help you," Caleb said. "I've birthed calves and foals. I know it is not the same, but I know the basics, and you are strong. We will get through this together." "I am frightened," Josephine admitted. "I know, I am too. But I will be with you every moment. I promise." When her labor finally started on a warm April morning, with the snow melting and the first flowers pushing up through the thawing ground, Caleb proved as good as his word. He stayed by her side through every contraction, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, speaking words of encouragement and love. The labor was long and difficult, lasting well into the night. There were moments when Josephine was certain she could not go on, could not endure another wave of pain. But Caleb was there, his strength lending her strength, his faith in her giving her courage. And then, as the first light of dawn broke over the mountains, their son was born. Caleb caught the baby with capable hands, clearing his airway and rubbing his back until he let out a lusty cry. Then he wrapped the infant in soft blankets and placed him in Josephine's arms. "A boy," Caleb said, his voice choked with emotion. "We have a son." Josephine looked down at the tiny, perfect face of her child and felt love unlike anything she had ever experienced. This was her son. Hers and Caleb's, the physical manifestation of their love. He had dark hair like his father and blue eyes that would probably change color as he grew. His little fists waved in the air, and when she touched his palm, his fingers closed around hers with surprising strength. "He is perfect," she whispered. "He is," Caleb agreed. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names over the winter, but suddenly Josephine knew exactly what was right. "Samuel," she said, "for your brother, so that his name lives on. And so our son carries a piece of your family with him." Caleb looked at her with such love and gratitude that Josephine felt her heart might burst. "Samuel Stone," he said, testing the name. I like it very much. Sam will be proud to have his name carried on by this little man." Over the following weeks, they adjusted to life as new parents. Samuel was a good baby, healthy and strong, though he kept them up many nights with his crying and need for feeding. Josephine was exhausted but happier than she had ever been. Watching Caleb with their son, seeing this strong mountain man cradling their tiny baby with such tenderness and care, made her fall in love with him all over again. As spring progressed into summer, they took Samuel outside to experience the mountain air and sunshine. Josephine fashioned a sling from cloth so she could carry him while still having her hands free to work. They introduced him to the creek, letting his tiny feet dabble in the cold water while he shrieked with surprise and delight. They showed him the garden, the forest, the vast sky, and towering peaks. "He will grow up knowing this land," Josephine said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold while Samuel nursed. "He will be at home in the wilderness in a way that city children never are." "He will be free," Caleb agreed, "free to be whoever he wants to be, to make his own choices. We will make sure of that." 2 years passed in a blur of seasons and growth. Samuel learned to walk, to talk, to help with small chores around the cabin. He was a curious, energetic child, fascinated by everything around him. Caleb taught him to recognize animal tracks, to move quietly through the forest, to respect the wildlife that shared their mountain home. Josephine continued to thrive in her new life. She had become an excellent shot with a rifle, could trap small game, could navigate by the stars. She tended the garden and preserved food, and managed their household with capable efficiency. She also continued to read voraciously books that Caleb brought back from his trading trips, and she began teaching Samuel his letters and numbers even though he was still very young. They were happy, truly happy, in a way that still surprised Josephine sometimes. This was the life she had been looking for without knowing it. This was the love she had been seeking. One afternoon in late summer, as Josephine was hanging laundry and Samuel was playing nearby with a toy Caleb had carved for him, she heard the sound of horses approaching. Her heart leaped into her throat. They rarely had visitors, and unexpected guests could mean trouble. Caleb emerged from the barn where he had been working and moved to stand beside her, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. Together they watched as 3 riders entered the clearing. The lead rider was a woman, Josephine realized with surprise, dressed in practical traveling clothes. The 2 men with her had the look of hired guards or guides. As they drew closer, Josephine gasped. It was her mother. Elizabeth Clarke looked older than Josephine remembered, more worn and tired. But her face lit up with recognition and joy when she saw Josephine. "Mother?" Josephine said. "I hardly believing it." Elizabeth dismounted quickly and rushed forward. For a moment, mother and daughter simply stared at each other. Then Elizabeth pulled Josephine into a fierce embrace. "You are alive!" Elizabeth sobbed. "Oh, thank God, you are alive! I knew it! I knew you could not be dead!" "How did you find me?" Josephine asked when they finally pulled apart. "It took months of searching, hiring investigators, following rumors and whispers. Someone in Virginia City remembered a man buying supplies and a dress for a woman matching your description. We tracked him back here." Elizabeth looked at Caleb, then at Samuel, who had run over to clutch at his mother's skirts, shy of the strangers. Is this your husband?" Elizabeth asked. "And your child?" "Yes," Josephine said, reaching for Caleb's hand and pulling him forward. "Mother, this is Caleb Stone, my husband, and this is Samuel, our son. Caleb, this is my mother, Elizabeth Clarke." Caleb inclined his head respectfully. "Ma'am, your daughter has told me much about you." Elizabeth studied him for a long moment, taking in his size, his rough mountain clothing, the way his hand rested protectively on Josephine's shoulder. "You are the one who helped her after she ran from the wedding." "I am," Caleb confirmed. "And you married her." "I did." "I love her, ma'am. I know I am not what you would have chosen for your daughter. I have no money or social standing, but I give you my word that I will spend every day of my life taking care of her and making her happy." Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears again. "I can see that. I can see how she looks at you, how you look at her. I can see that she is happy, truly happy. In a way she never was in Silver Creek." She turned to Josephine. "Your father still believes you are dead. It has broken him in ways I never expected. The business no longer matters to him. He just grieves." "I'm sorry for that," Josephine said quietly. "But I could not stay. I could not marry Herbert. That life would have killed me, just more slowly." "I know," Elizabeth said. "I know that now. I was so caught up in what I thought you should want that I never stopped to ask what you actually wanted. I was a terrible mother, and I'm sorry." "You were not terrible," Josephine said. "You were doing what you thought was best. But yes, you did not listen. None of you did." Elizabeth looked around at the cabin, the garden, the mountains rising in the distance. "Is this what you want? Truly? This isolated life, so far from everything?" "This is everything," Josephine said simply. "This is love and freedom and authenticity. This is a real life, Mother, not a performance. Caleb and I are partners. He respects me, values my opinions, treats me as an equal. We work together, dream together, build our life together, and our son will grow up knowing he is loved unconditionally, not for what he can do for the family business, but for who he is." Elizabeth nodded slowly. "Then I am happy for you, truly. It is not the life I would have chosen for you, but it is clearly the life you chose for yourself, and that matters more." She stayed for 2 days, getting to know Caleb and Samuel, hearing about Josephine's life in the mountains. Josephine could see her mother's surprise at how capable she had become, how confident and strong. For they talked long into the nights, healing old wounds, building a new understanding. On the morning of the third day, as Elizabeth prepared to leave, she embraced Josephine one last time. "Will you tell Father that I am alive?" Josephine asked. "Only if you want me to," Elizabeth said. "I will respect your wishes." Josephine considered. "Tell him. But tell him also that I am happy, that I have a good husband and a beautiful son, that I am exactly where I am meant to be. Tell him that I forgive him, but I will not be coming back." "I will tell him," Elizabeth promised. She turned to Caleb. "Take care of my daughter." "Always," Caleb said. Elizabeth pressed a small leather bag into Josephine's hands. "Your grandmother's jewelry. It should have gone to you anyway. Sell it if you need money or keep it for Samuel. But it is yours." Then she was gone, riding back down the mountain with her guides, leaving Josephine and Caleb standing together with Samuel between them. "Are you all right?" Caleb asked. "I am," Josephine said, and realized she meant it. "That was hard, but it was good. I think she finally understands." Life continued in the mountains. 3 years later, Josephine gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose. She had her mother's brown hair and her father's blue-green eyes, and from the moment she could walk, she followed her older brother everywhere. Caleb expanded the cabin, adding 2 more rooms and a larger front porch. He built furniture, crafted toys for the children, and worked tirelessly to provide for his family. Josephine continued to be his partner in every way, helping with the trapping and hunting, managing their household, teaching the children everything they would need to know to thrive in their mountain home. They were not wealthy by society's standards. They lived simply, off the land, with few luxuries. But they were rich in the things that mattered: love, respect, partnership, freedom, joy. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Caleb took Josephine up to a high meadow he had discovered, a place where wildflowers bloomed in profusion and the views stretched for miles in every direction. They left the children with a trusted neighbor from a cabin a few miles away, one of the few other families living in these remote mountains. "I wanted to bring you here," Caleb said as they stood together, surrounded by flowers and mountain air, "because this is how I think of our life together, beautiful and wild and free. You took a chance on me, Josephine, on this life, and you have made me happier than I ever thought possible." "You saved me," Josephine said, "that day in the forest when I had run from my wedding and had no idea what I was going to do. You saved me. You gave me shelter and kindness and eventually love. You gave me a real life, Caleb, a life worth living." "We saved each other," Caleb said, pulling her into his arms, "and we built something beautiful together." He kissed her there in the high meadow, with the mountains all around them and the sky endless overhead, and Josephine knew that she had found exactly what she had been searching for. She had run from her wedding right into the arms of the man she was always meant to be with. Years continued to pass in the mountains. Samuel grew into a strong, capable young man, skilled in all the ways of the wilderness, but also educated through the books his mother insisted he read and the lessons she taught him. Rose was equally at home in the mountains, but she also inherited her mother's love of learning and her father's steady temperament. When Samuel was 15 and Rose was 12, another child joined their family, a son they named Michael. And 2 years after that came another daughter, Grace. The cabin had to be expanded again to accommodate their growing family. Caleb built on with help from Samuel, who by now was nearly as strong as his father. The cabin became a true homestead, with multiple rooms, a barn for animals, a root cellar for food storage, and a workshop where Caleb taught his sons the skills they would need. Josephine's mother visited twice more over the years, the only connection to Josephine's old life. She brought news from Silver Creek, stories that seemed to come from another world. Herbert Dalton III had eventually married someone else, a woman from New York society who apparently suited his ambitions perfectly. Josephine's father had sold his businesses and retired, his health and spirit broken by what he still saw as the loss of his daughter. "He still does not know I am alive?" Josephine asked during her mother's 3rd visit. "He knows," Elizabeth admitted. "I told him after my first visit here. But he is too proud to reach out, too ashamed, I think, of what he almost forced you into. He sends his love, though he will never say it himself. And he made me promise to give you this." She handed Josephine a sealed envelope. But inside was a letter in her father's handwriting and a deed to a large tract of land surrounding Caleb's cabin. "I purchased the land years ago," the letter read, "thinking to use it for logging or mining. But now I give it to you, my daughter, so that you and your family will always have a home, so that no one can ever force you from the place you have chosen. I was wrong to try to control your life. I was wrong to value business over your happiness. I do not expect your forgiveness, but I hope you will accept this gift in the spirit it is given. You have a beautiful family, and I am proud of the woman you have become. Your father." Josephine cried when she read it, all the old hurts and angers finally healing. She wrote back to him, a long letter describing her life, her husband, her children, the joy she had found in the mountains. She never saw him again, but they exchanged letters for the rest of his life, building a fragile but real connection across the miles. When Josephine was 45 and Caleb was 48, Samuel married a young woman from one of the neighboring homesteads, a girl as strong and capable as his mother. They built their own cabin a mile up the ridge, close enough for help but far enough for privacy. Within a year, they made Josephine and Caleb grandparents for the first time. Rose followed a different path. She had inherited her mother's love of books and learning, and when she was 17, she announced her intention to go to a teaching college in Denver. It was hard to let her go, but both Josephine and Caleb understood the need to follow your own path. "She is like you," Caleb told Josephine the day they saw Rose off on the stagecoach that would take her to the train. "Strong-willed and determined to make her own choices. We raised her right." Michael and Grace remained at home, helping with the homestead, learning the land the way their father and older brother had. On a crisp autumn evening, many years after that fateful day when Josephine had run from her wedding, she and Caleb sat on their porch watching the sunset. They were older now, their hair streaked with gray, their bodies bearing the marks of years of hard work, but they were still strong, still healthy, still deeply in love. "Do you ever regret it?" Caleb asked suddenly. "Running from that wedding? Ending up here with me?" Josephine looked at him in surprise. "Regret it?" Caleb stoned. "How could I possibly regret the best decision I ever made? You could have had an easier life, comfort, society, culture." "I have comfort," Josephine said firmly. "I have the comfort of waking up each day next to the man I love. I have society, my family, and my friends in these mountains. I have culture, books and music, and the beauty of nature all around me. But most importantly, I have freedom and respect and partnership. I have a life that is truly mine. How could I regret that?" Caleb smiled and pulled her close. "I had to ask, just to be sure." "I ran from my wedding," Josephine said, "and I ran right into your arms. That was the luckiest day of my life." "Mine too," Caleb agreed. They sat together in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and gold. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. From inside the cabin came the sounds of their youngest children preparing dinner, the normalcy of family life. Josephine thought back to that terrified girl in a wedding dress, throwing herself out a church window and running blindly into the forest. She had been so scared, so desperate, so certain that anything was better than the future being forced upon her. She had been right. Everything that had happened since that day, every challenge and joy and moment, had been worth it. She had found real love with Caleb, built a real life in these mountains, raised children who were confident and capable and free to make their own choices. The town had gasped when she ran from her wedding. They had been scandalized, shocked, convinced she had lost her mind. But she had known exactly what she was doing. She was choosing herself, her own path, her own future. And when Caleb had said she had run right into his arms, he was right. She had found safety and love and partnership with this strong, gentle mountain man. She had found everything she had been searching for and more. As the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to appear, one by one, Josephine leaned her head on Caleb's shoulder and smiled. This was happiness. This was love. This was home. And she would not change a single thing. Years continued to add their weight and wisdom. Samuel and his wife had 3 children of their own, making frequent visits to the homestead, with babies, and then toddlers, and then energetic youngsters who loved learning wilderness skills from their grandfather. But Rose returned from college and became a teacher, not in the city as expected, but in a small mountain town 2 days' ride away, where she married a local doctor and started her own family. Michael eventually took over most of the day-to-day running of the homestead as Caleb's body began to slow with age. Grace married a trapper who had stopped at their cabin one winter seeking shelter from a blizzard and ended up staying for love. They built their own place on the family land, close enough to help but independent. Through it all, Josephine and Caleb remained the steady center of their growing family. They were the patriarch and matriarch, the ones everyone came to for advice, for comfort, for the kind of unconditional love and acceptance that only parents and grandparents can provide. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren all gathered at the homestead for a celebration. There was music and dancing, abundant food, and endless laughter. At one point, Samuel stood up to make a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass, "you showed all of us what real love looks like. Not the romantic notions from fairy tales, but the day-to-day choosing of each other, the partnership and respect and unwavering support. You built this life from nothing, and in doing so, you gave us the best possible foundation. Thank you for your courage, your love, and your example." Everyone cheered and drank, and Josephine found herself crying happy tears as Caleb squeezed her hand. That night, after everyone had gone to bed and the homestead was quiet, Josephine and Caleb walked up to the high meadow where they had gone on their 5th anniversary. It took longer now, their bodies not as spry as they once were, but they made it eventually. The wildflowers were just as beautiful as they had been 20 years earlier, swaying in the breeze beneath a sky full of stars. 25 years, Caleb marveled. Where did the time go? "Into living," Josephine said, "into loving and raising our family and building our life. Every year has been a gift. Even the hard ones, especially the hard ones, they taught us how strong we are, how much we can endure when we face things together." Caleb pulled her close, and they swayed together in the moonlight, a slow dance with only the wind and the stars as witnesses. "I love you, Josephine Stone," Caleb said, "more today than yesterday, and less than I will tomorrow. That will be true for the rest of our lives." "I love you too," Josephine replied, "my mountain man, my savior, my partner, my love." They stayed in the meadow for a long time, holding each other beneath the vast Montana sky, grateful for every moment that had led them to this place. The years rolled on with their inevitable march. Caleb passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72, with Josephine holding his hand and their children gathered around. He had lived a good life, a full life, a life rich with love and purpose. His last words were, "I see you, Josephine. I will always see you." The grief was profound, a physical ache that Josephine thought might never heal. But she was sustained by her family, by her memories, by the knowledge that she had been truly loved and had truly loved in return. She remained on the homestead, helping with the grandchildren, teaching them to read and think and question, passing on the lessons she had learned. She lived another 15 years after Caleb's death, strong and sharp until nearly the end. And when she finally felt her own time approaching, she was not afraid. She had lived the life she chose. She had loved and been loved. She had made a difference in the world, if only in the lives of her family. On a spring morning, with wildflowers blooming outside her window and her children and grandchildren surrounding her bed, Josephine closed her eyes for the last time. Her final thought was of that long-ago summer day when she had thrown herself out a church window in a wedding dress, or running toward an unknown future. She had run right into the arms of love, and that, she thought with her last breath, had made all the difference. The homestead remained in the family for generations after that, passed down through the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren of Josephine and Caleb Stone. And every new generation heard the story of their brave ancestor who had run from her wedding and found true love with a mountain man in the wilderness of Montana Territory. It became a legend in the family, a reminder that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is run toward the life you want instead of accepting the life others plan for you. That real love is built on respect and partnership. That happiness comes from living authentically, even when that means choosing a harder path. The story of Josephine and Caleb lived on, inspiring courage and hope in everyone who heard it. Because it was not just a story about two people who fell in love, it was a story about freedom and choice, and the incredible things that can happen when you take your life into your own hands. She ran from her wedding. The town gasped. But the mountain man just smiled and said she had run right into his arms, and they lived happily ever after.